Hey guys, thanks for turning in. My name's Don. I'm going to talk to you about what I consider to be probably the best fishing partner I ever had. I've had plenty of them over the years. We changed things dramatically years ago when it came to bass fishing tournaments. For those of you that can remember back, all the tournaments, clubs, everything was always a matter of drawing a partner. If you were a boater, kind of went into one pot. If you were a non-boater, you went into the other pot. And then the names were drawn usually the night before the tournament, so you didn't really know who you were going to fish with. And you'd end up getting a partner selected for you. And as the boater, you would run the boat. The non-boater would fish out of the back of the boat. And that's the way tournaments were held for a long time. Don't know exactly when it was that we changed things up and went to picking our own partners. I do remember, kind of vaguely, I kind of remember back, I don't know, 20 years, 25 years ago, I remember a bass club that I started, and it started out as a BASS chapter. So, of course, we followed the rules of all the chapters in the Bass Angler Sportsman Society rules and regulations. But some of the guys started complaining that, they ended up having to fish with, you know, some old guy or some guy that didn't know anything about fishing, and they felt like it really hurt their own success. And they wanted to pick somebody that they wanted to fish with. And I understood that. So, we went on for a while as a regular chapter, and then eventually we broke away from BASS and became a team club as opposed to, a bass chapter that forced or required everyone to not have any choice in who they were going to fish with. About that time, I started fishing with a couple different guys. And for years, I fished off and on with one guy for a while and then maybe found another guy and we hooked up on a few tournaments. Um, One of the first guys I ever fished with that I spent a lot of time with, I fished with him for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, fished all the bass club tournaments and a few of the regional tournaments together. His name was Bert Watkins, great guy. Uh, he actually lived less than a mile from me, and to be honest with you, I don't even remember how I met him, but he loved to fish, and uh, and he was an interesting guy to fish with. He wasn't the most competitive guy. He's a good fisherman, but I can still remember I used to get mad at him because he would literally take a almost a picnic lunch with him, and lunchtime would roll around and he was done. He was going to stop fishing. Didn't matter if it was a cash tournament, money tournament. He was going to stop and he was going to eat lunch. And he'd lay everything out. He had a couple of paper plates, he had his little salt shaker and pepper shaker, and some bag of chips. And I used to get mad at him. I said, "Don't spill any chips in my boat. They're hard to get out of the carpeting." But he'd have a nice leisurely lunch, and then he'd put it all away and he'd go right back to fishing. Um, he was a lot of fun to fish with, and we used to go out to dinner with him and his wife, and my wife and I, and we had a lot of fun with him as a couple, as well as a fishing partner. And probably the funniest story I can recall from fishing with Bert. We were fishing on a lake called Lake Glenada, and it was up in Avon Park, and it was a small lake, not real big. Some guys would probably have heard of it. A few guys like me, we know that it's probably one of the best big bass lakes, in Highlands County. But Bert and I were fishing there, and I think we were fishing a tournament. And when the tournament ended, uh, we were coming in, and the Lake Lanada has one small dock coming off of it. Not very big. It's right alongside the boat ramp, like in most lakes. And I was driving the boat, and as I brought the boat in, I tried to come up and just kind of go alongside the dock, give him a chance to step off onto the dock, and then I'd keep right on going. Unfortunately, I was moving a little bit faster than I might, what maybe should have. And Bert, rather than jump, he kind of ran and jumped. And when he did, because the boat was moving and he was moving, he did a perfect swan dive right off the edge into the water. And fortunately, nobody, was loading the boat up or dropping a boat, so there was no trailer in the water. But he took a nice healthy dive and he come up out of the water. It was pretty funny. He wasn't happy about it, but it was pretty funny. Anyway, he was one of the guys that I fished with for quite a while, and uh, he actually passed away a few years ago. He was a great guy, and I really enjoyed fishing with him. Uh, the next guy that I really hooked up with for a period of time, at least, um, was a really interesting guy. Uh, and I'm not gonna try to name all my partners over the years. I just wanted to mention Bert. But uh, but this guy was part Indian, and what made it so unique fishing with him is I think he only owned one fishing rod, and he that's what he brought every time we went fishing. He only fished with a jig. That's all he ever fished with. He didn't, didn't matter to him if they were hitting top water, or it didn't matter. He was only going to fish with a jig. He was a damn good fisherman. But he put me on a couple of really big fish. I mean, when I say he put me on them, we went through what they call the hay fields on one of the lake, and he was looking for a big fish. He was looking for a wall hanger. He's something that was big, that was on a bed. And I'm driving the boat. I'm driving the boat with the electric motor, and I'm going along, and he's actually in the front of the boat, but he's kind of leaning over the side. He's just kind of watching the little openings, the little pockets. He spots one and tells me to stop. I stopped, and we just sat there for a few minutes. He wanted the water to kind of settle. And I looked down, I could see a small bass, 12, 14 inches. And it was obviously guarding the bed. And he said, "There's a big bass down there." He said, "It's a really big bass." And I said, "Hey, man, I don't see nothing. I just see that little buck bass." And he said, "Trust me, it's down there." He said, "Drop a bait in there. Drop your jig." So I dropped a medlock jig in there, popped it a couple of times, nothing. Took it out, dropped it in again, popped it a couple of times, nothing. He said, "Just let it sit." So I let it sit in the middle of the tank, and of course the male bass grabbed it. I gave a jerk, he come out of the water. Took him off the hook, threw him back in. A few minutes later, I'm back to doing the same thing. I put the jig right on top of the bed, and there's the little buck bass again. He come right back to the same spot, didn't hesitate, grabbed that jig a second time. I caught him, flipped him up into the boat, and Dalton said, "Throw him in the live well." So I did. I threw him in the live well. Wasn't going to keep him. Just wanted to get him the hell out of there so I could, spend more time trying to work on catching the female. So, I'm getting a little uh, losing my patience a little bit, because now there's nothing there. There's no fish. There's not even a little bass to watch. And he's telling me to continue, dropping this bait in there. And I put it in, I let it sit a minute, and I'd pop it a couple of times. Nothing's happening. I'd throw it a little farther out, so I got to hop it back into the nest. All of a sudden, this huge bass comes out of nowhere. Her nose just kind of sticks out from the bed, and you can tell she's watching this jig. And I'm like, "Oh, shit." There it is. You're right. And, I popped this jig a couple more times and right away she grabbed it. And as soon as she did, I set the hook. And when I did, she had it for just a second and she was gone. I lost her. I missed her. I said, geez, I can't believe it. I missed that fish. It's an easy 10-pounder. And Dalton said, well, don't worry, don't worry. She'll be back. She'll come back. She's guarding this nest. She's going to come back. And I'm like, oh, I can't believe I had the chance here and I could have caught her. And we just kind of slowed down. And he said, let's just cool it for a few minutes. She'll come back. And he said, meantime, he said, drop that jig in there and, have a little patience. So I did. I dropped it in and, I popped it a few times, nothing happened. Dropped it in, popped it a few times, nothing happened. Put it in, let it sit, nothing happened. This went on for like 10 minutes and I was ready to give up and move on. I mean, we were fishing a bass tournament. I didn't want to spend all day in one spot trying to catch a fish I'd already missed. I was kind of in that school of thought where, you miss a fish, if that fish felt that steel, felt the hook, they're not going to bite again. But he was convinced, this fish would. So I stuck with it, and pretty soon out came that big nose again. And this time she was pretty wary. She was pretty cautious. She could see the bait. She'd move a little bit towards it, and then she'd back up. And then she'd move a little bit towards it, and she'd back up. And believe me, I tried everything. I bounced it. I let it sit. I raised and lowered it. I couldn't think of anything more I could do with it. And finally, I just let it fall, let it lay in the bed. And each time she would move towards it, and then she would move back, move towards it, move back. Finally, she just left. She just disappeared. And I thought, well, that's it. Not going to get her again. And I don't know. I think I was lighting a cigarette, or I was doing something, taking a drink of water. I was doing something, but I looked away. And in that split second, she came out of that grass like a torpedo. She hit that lure and almost took my rod with her. And fortunately, I was able to quickly grab the rod and kind of set up. And when I did, she come right out of the water. This time I had her hooked. And I managed to land the fish. And she didn't go 10, she went 9.6, but she was the biggest bass in the tournament. And it turned out she was the biggest bass of the year. So it was quite an achievement. And by the way, I think I did mention the guy's name. His name was Dalton Hundhausen. So if you're still out there, Dalton, I don't know whatever happened to you, but if you're still out there, I'd love to hear from you. You were a great fisherman, a great partner, and I don't know where you went, what happened to you over the years. But anyway, moving on. Again, I don't want to get into the detail of every partner I ever had, but I want to get to a certain point where I want to talk about one of the best partners I ever had. And it's not to take anything away from anybody else. I mean, Bert was a great partner. Dalton was a great partner. I've had other guys that I really enjoyed fishing with. But probably the best partner I ever had was a guy, let's see here, I could do everything backwards. But the guy's name was Nick DeSanta, right here, over here. Anyway, Nick was pretty well known around here anyway in Highlands County. Uh, a lot of guys called him the old man. I don't think he was really too much older than I was, but he looked old. He was a skinny, scraggly looking guy. In fact, um, he passed away a few years ago. Um, and as a tribute, I tried to coordinate a tournament. And these are some of the shirts that I had made. And you can see that's him. And that's a few of the fish, that that he caught. I don't even know where that picture came from, but but I still have some of his T-shirts left, and I wear them from time to time, and they bring back some really great memories. Um, but Nick was maybe 5'8", 5'9". Couldn't have weighed much more than 100 pounds. And in fact, he somebody told me one time, I don't know if it's true or not, but they said he was a tunnel rat in Vietnam. He used to go into these little caves, these little holes in the ground, and drag out Viet Cong, uh, which doesn't surprise me. I mean, nothing about Nick would surprise me, but he was a tough little guy and incredible fisherman. I mean, this guy, he never slowed down. He was constantly fishing. He never stopped to eat, never stopped to drink, just go, go, go. I only ever fished with him once out of his boat. And that one time that I fished with him, he had a smaller bass boat. But that one time I fished with him, I've never fished so fast in my life. And by fast, I mean he put that electric motor on high speed. He put his foot on the pedal and he never let up. And I mean, you'd get in a cast and you were, you know, 500 feet away when you cast the second time. And I used to tell him, slow down, slow down. But he was just in a hurry. He caught a lot of fish. I mean, he really could catch fish, but he did like to move quickly. Together, he and I won a number of tournaments, and I attribute a lot of that to him. We actually won a couple of tournaments down on Lake June years ago, but we had gone in and we were using just a small jig with plastic worm on it, and we got into some bass. I think February. The month was February, and obviously they were spawning bass, and we were just catching one fish after another. It's during a tournament, and finally he hooked into got a big fish. It was 10 pounds. Ended up weighing over 10. And shortly after that, I got one that went 8.5. And together we had a weight that day of, I think it was around 29 pounds, 30 pounds. And we won the tournament. And what was so ironic is we went out a month later, went to the same exact area. And this time I caught a 10-pound fish, 10-pound bass. He caught one about 8 pounds. And again, we had almost the same weight. I think it was 29 or 30 pounds. But we won back-to-back tournaments. And that was pretty amazing back in those days to be able to do that. And we did it all with a tiny little jig, with a plastic worm on the back of it. And we just throwing it in, looking for these. We'd see these, they looked like dark spots in the water, but they were small grass beds. And what was happening is the bass were moving in and they were actually spawning in or around these grass beds. And we'd throw right beyond the grass bed, let the bait go in. And because the jig was a weedless jig, we let it go right into the grass bed, pop it a couple of times. And about the time it jumped up out of the grass, that's when the fish grabbed it. But it was a fun time. I mean, we really, really had a good time in both those tournaments. There was another tournament that we won over on Lake Istapoca, and it was a whole different scenario. We actually hadn't done very well. We were up on the north end of the lake, west side of the lake, and we'd picked up a few fish. We had probably 5 fish in the live well, but they were small. We might have had 8 pounds, 7 pounds. And we knew we had to have some bigger fish. This was actually one of John's one of John's tournaments back 10, 15 years ago, and he was running this whole circuit, and we were just one of the teams that fished it. He used to get around 50 boats, and up to that point, I don't think we had won any of them. We had placed a couple of times, Anyway, we on this particular tournament, we had our limit, but they were too small to do much. And it was probably about noon, and it was obvious we were just going to keep catching these same small fish. And I said, there's a spot down on the south end of Lake Istapoca, one of my favorite spots. I had just taken a guide trip maybe a month earlier, and the guy I was fishing with, right out of the gate, he got one about 8.5 pounds out of there. And I said, "There's been some big fish caught out of this. It's just a relatively small reed patch and shallow water." I said, "Let's run down there." I said, I had a lot of success there. Yeah, we don't really have anything to lose. So it was about noon. I think the tournament was over at 2 or 3. So we run down and started going around like in a circle, just going around, flipping, pitching plastic worms, jigs. And within 10 minutes, we caught one. I don't remember if I caught it or if he caught it, but it was about maybe 3.5 pounds. So we were able to replace one of the fish in the live well, and maybe we gained a pound or two. And a few minutes later, we caught another one. We were able to do the same thing. This one was about 4 pounds. We were able to replace the smaller fish. And by now, the wind started picking up a little bit, and it was getting harder and harder to go around this reed island because the wind was blowing across the lake. And over in that area, it's pretty exposed. It's pretty wide open. So finally, I said, "You know what?" I said, let's let the wind blow us through the reeds. We'll go a lot slower, and we can just fish ahead of us." And that's what we did. And we hadn't gone 10 feet. I hooked a big fish. And I fought that fish and fought that. We had a hell of a time getting it in because it was wrapping around everything. But I had, 55, 60 pound braids, so I knew I could drag him through all that stuff if I had to. And we finally got him in the boat. And we were just overjoyed. It couldn't have been more excited. And, obviously, you put an 8 pound fish in the live well and take out a 1 pound fish, you had pretty significant gain. But we weren't done. We went a little farther on that same drift, and all of a sudden, Nick said, "I'm either snagged or I got a really big fish." And it wasn't moving, and he was just holding that fishing rod, and I'm trying to move the boat towards it. So now I've got the wind behind me and the electric motors chopping things up. Finally, we got up fairly close to where the bass was, and it took off. It was no longer a snag. And he fought it, got it in, got the net up under, got it in. It went 10-5. And those two fish, along with a couple others we had, put us right at about 28 pounds, I think. And we ended up winning the John Woods tournament. It was the only one we ever won, but it was a pretty significant weight. And again, it was just, it was a team effort. And I still remember dragging those fish up to the weigh-in, and we were both exhausted. It was hot, and we got a couple of good pictures, and just, filed it back there with some other great memories. Now, one other trip that I wanted to mention with Nick, we were down on Lake Placid, and we were fishing a tournament down there, and it was a normal tournament. Well, we had 4 or 5 fish, nothing to brag about, and it was getting late in the day. It was probably 1 o'clock, 1:30, and it was getting hot. I mean, really hot. It was probably 90 degrees, maybe hotter. Probably, I don't know when the tournament was, but probably June, maybe September. I don't remember, but it was really hot, and I kept telling Nick, "Man, you got to slow down a little bit. I said, you're going to burn yourself up." Finally, I convinced him to stop and drink some water or something. So he reached in the cooler. He grabbed a water bottle that he had brought and turned it up. I saw him turn it up, and he just chugged the whole bottle. He got about three-quarters of the way through, and he started foaming at the mouth. And I mean, like a rabid dog. He was foaming and foaming, coughing and hacking. Started throwing up the water that he just drank. I thought, my God, what is wrong with him? So I walked over and I kind of patted his back and helped him kind of lean over the side of the boat. And I mean, foam is just coming out of his nose and just unbelievable. Finally, I said, are you having a heart attack? I mean, what? Finally, I got him to kind of lay down in the boat. And he was small enough, he could kind of lay down a little bit in that little cubby area. I grabbed my phone and I called 911. And I said, I'm out here on Lake Placid, and I'm fishing a bass tournament, but I think my partner's having a heart attack. And the guy said, whereabouts are you located? And I told him about where on the lake. And he said, okay. He said, just go to such and such ramp. And he said, we'll meet you there with an ambulance. So, um, I, I told Nick, I says, just take it easy. Hang on, hang on. I put that boat into gear, and man, I mean, we were flying across that lake. And I thought he was going to be dead before he even got in. And, he'd already had a couple of heart attacks. This wasn't anything new. I think he'd already had two or three heart attacks. Uh, but, I really thought he was going to die before I could get in. And finally, as I approached the boat ramp, the ambulance was already there. There were two guys with a stretcher right out there on the dock. I pulled up. They jumped in the boat, put him on a stretcher, lifted him up, moved him out, got up under the one of the trees over there and started doing everything to him. And I remember I walked up and I said, is he going to be okay? And like, yeah, well, just give us a minute. And I said, is he having a heart attack? And they said, yeah, he just had a heart attack. And I said, oh, man. So finally, they load him up. They take him off to the hospital. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I'll go back and tell his wife. So I loaded up the boat, got everything, and I'm like, geez, I can't believe this, And I drove over to his house, and his wife was around back. I knocked on the door. She came out, and I said, I don't know what's going on, but I think Nick was having a heart attack in the boat, and they took him over to the hospital down in Lake Placid. And I said, I can take you down there. And she said, no, no, no. She said, you go ahead and take your boat and, get unhooked and everything. She said, I'll just jump in the car around down there. So that's what she did. And I ended up going home and I unhooked the boat, told my wife about it, got back in the truck, drove down to Lake Placid and see if he was okay. Well, here's what happened. Unbeknownst to either me or him, when he had grabbed a couple bottles of water out of the refrigerator or freezer, wherever he got them, when I picked him up in the morning, here, one of the bottles was full of hydrogen peroxide, which I guess somebody had given his wife a couple gallons of it, and she used it. She raised horses, and I don't know, she used it for the horses, whether it was cleaning them or whatever, disinfecting them or something. And it was easier. She couldn't handle the big container it was in, so she put it in a lot of these small water bottles. She claims that she told Nick half a dozen times. Of course, Nick probably didn't pay any attention to her. And by mistake, he grabbed one. Well, it's clear. It looks just like water. And that's what he chugged that day out on the lake. And that's why he was foaming at the mouth. And as it turned out, he did have a heart attack. He had a mild heart attack. And he survived, of course. But at the same time, he also burned his esophagus. I guess the hydrogen peroxide literally burned it. And he had a difficult time talking for a few weeks because it was very tender and very sore. But eventually he got over it. And from that point on, it seemed like every time we'd go fishing, I'd give him a hard time about, asking if he brought a bottle of hydrogen peroxide. But anyway, he was really a great fishing partner, and I really really enjoyed fishing with him. He uh, he was actually over in I think somewhere on the coast, Clearwater, somewhere over in that area. He and his wife were going to some kind of a fair that they were having over there. It's been a few years ago, and you're walking alongside of the road, and a drunk driver actually veered off the road and hit both of them and killed them instantly. Uh, Turned out the guy that ran him down was an illegal alien. He was an Arab. Not that it makes any difference, I guess, but you know, he took a very dear friend away, and to this day, I think there's a lot of us that would like to know what happened to that guy because he deserves, you know, he deserves a pretty tough sentence. I mean, he was drunk. I'm sure he didn't mean to kill him, but he did. He killed both of them, and it's a sad legacy to Nick's name and his wife that they had to go that way. But anyway, it was fun to reminisce a little bit about Nick, and there's a lot of guys that can relate to Nick DeSanta. Like I say, he was one of a kind, and there'll never be anybody like him again. And by all stretch of the imagination, again, I've had lots of partners, and I don't mean to take anything away from any of them. They were all great guys, and they are great guys. But Nick was the best. So, anyway, if you like this video, check that box down below, and don't be afraid to subscribe to my channel. I got a lot of great stories, and if you knew Nick, if you had the opportunity to meet him, or if you have any thoughts or any stories you want to share, by all means, put them in the remarks down below. I'll make sure I respond to them. Thanks for checking in with me today. I hope you enjoyed this story as much as I enjoyed telling it.